Russia doesn't have the stomach for the types of full-frontal mechanized assaults that it launched against Ukraine's defenses during the first few years of the war. As its tanks burned and its soldiers died in droves, Russia turned to much sneakier methods to get its soldiers into Ukrainian territory. Rather than assaulting, these soldiers infiltrate by attempting to use the extensive network of gas pipelines that crisscross Ukraine to reach their destinations. We say attempt for a reason. The pipeline attacks don't always go as planned. That was the case in Kupyansk, as a secret Russian pipeline attack backfired horribly. Russia's sneaky soldiers had nowhere to run after Ukraine discovered them, and what Ukraine did was brutal. It all started with a plan concocted by Russian commanders to sneak a few dozen soldiers through northeastern Kharkiv and in the direction of Kupyansk. Russian forces identified the Soyuz pipeline as the perfect entry point, the Kyiv Independent reports, as that pipeline would allow for its soldiers to emerge unseen so they could place more pressure on a city that Vladimir Putin has spent several months trying to capture. Putin wants Kupyansk badly, and there are several reasons why. Euromaidan Press explained some of those reasons back in February 2024, which offers a hint at how long Russia has been pushing to take this vital city in Kharkiv. It points out that Kupyansk is a major railway hub that could end up being the key to Putin's efforts to capture all of Donetsk and Luhansk, which is collectively known as the Donbass. If these two regions sound familiar, it's because Putin has said that Ukraine will have to hand Donetsk and Luhansk over to Russia if it's to have any chance of striking a peace deal. Capturing Kupyansk gives Russia control over a railway hub that Ukraine has been using to send soldiers and supplies into the Donbass, and Russia very much wants to sever that logistical artery. Beyond severing that artery for Ukraine, Russia would also benefit from taking control over the Kupyansk rails. Rather than serving Ukraine, those rails could instead enable Russia to deploy more troops into Ukraine's south and east, placing even more pressure on parts of the Donbass that remain under Ukraine's control. Plus, control over Kupyansk would allow Russia to provide support from the flanks as it continues its attempts to take the city of Kharkiv. Right now, Russia can't encircle that city, meaning Ukraine is able to defend it well. With Kupyansk under its control, Russia could attack from multiple directions, creating a host of problems for Ukraine's Kharkiv defenders to deal with. So it's clear that Kupyansk had plenty of strategic significance. However, there's also a touch of the symbolic in Putin's efforts to take the city. Toward the end of 2025, Russia made grand claims that its soldiers had captured Kupyansk. Those claims were quickly dispelled when no less than Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky took a trip to the embattled city to show that it was far from fallen. Zelensky congratulated Ukraine's soldiers on a recent counteroffensive that had seen them reverse recent Russian gains, and he shot footage of himself standing inside the city itself. Zelensky also used that video to send a message both to Putin and anybody who believes his lies about Russian territorial captures. Putin publicly lied, claiming that Russian forces had already taken the city, so I went to Kupyansk myself to show the world that Putin is lying, the Atlantic Council reports Zelensky is saying. We must keep exposing every single Russian falsehood because truth restores justice, Zelensky concluded. You can learn more about this video and what it means in the grand scheme of peace negotiations in our video covering the incident. However, that mention of negotiations reveals the symbolic importance that Kupyansk holds to Putin. The city is essentially a tool that Russia's leader wants to use to make Russia's battlefield gains seem more impressive than they really are. And the reason for this inflation of gains is that Putin is trying to use Russia's progress in Ukraine as leverage in peace talks. Russia's leader wants to take the supposed collapse of Kupyansk to US President Donald Trump and say, look, another Ukrainian city has fallen, and it will only be a matter of time before Russia takes the Donbass by force. Place pressure on Ukraine to cede the region, especially now that Russia controls the rail hub Ukraine uses for Donbass logistics. Ukraine continues to debunk lies just like these, but the potential impact of those lies makes Kupyansk as valuable to Putin as a lever for peace negotiations as it is for any strategic benefits that the city offers. The reality is that Kupyansk is far from a fallen city, and that brings us back to Russia's attempted pipeline infiltration. With his lies exposed, Putin and his cronies attempted to use the gas pipeline we've already mentioned to bring troops within range of an assault on the city that Russia claimed to hold back in December. Russia's efforts were documented by Ukraine's 7th Rapid Response Corps, which explained the Russian plan in full on January 5th. According to the 7th Corps, Russia intended to use a pipeline that offers an exit somewhere north of the settlement of Novoplatonivka, which is a village located just 5 kilometers or about 3.1 miles away from a small town named Borova. That town isn't exactly close to Kupyansk, as it's located about 35 kilometers or 21 miles south of the city that Putin's forces are targeting. However, the pipeline in question would have offered Russia's forces the ability to move upward along the Oskil River, meaning the intended sneaky path would take them closer to Kupyansk. United 24 Media provides a few more details in its report on the attempted pipeline infiltration, noting that Russia appears to have been preparing for an assault against Ukraine north of Novoplatonivka. That's why it wanted to sneak its troops into that region. The assault, were it successful, would have allowed Russia to advance toward the settlements of Novokrulakivka and Zarizova, both of which are in the Kupyansk direction. It was a complicated plan, and for any chance of the assault to be successful, Russia would need to push a substantial number of soldiers through the Soyuz pipeline. United 24 Media reports that Ukrainian officials estimate that around 50 Russian soldiers tried to make their way through the pipeline. More may have followed if that initial force of 50 had managed to establish the Soyuz pipeline as a viable route toward Kupyansk. But trying to establish that route is where it all went wrong for Russia. Unbeknownst to Putin's soldiers, Ukraine knew exactly what the infiltrators were trying to do. United 24 Media reports that Ukraine has identified the sneaky Russian move early enough to have the time it needed to launch a coordinated counter-assault involving several units. Among those units was the 77th Air Mobile Brigade, which is home to the Ukrainian airborne troops that ultimately crushed the attempted infiltration. The results of Ukraine's counterattack were brutal, as Russia's forces attempted to navigate their way through a dark, damp and disgusting gas pipeline. They were bombarded by a Ukrainian assault. By the end of the attack, at least 40 of Russia's soldiers had been eliminated, the Kyiv Independent reports the 7th Corps as stating. Any hope that Putin had of launching fresh assaults in the Kupyansk direction was dashed in an instant. He ended up with the blood of several dozen more of his soldiers on his hands, to add to the more than 1.21 million casualties that Russia has suffered since its president launched his ill-fated special military operation. And as is so often the case, Ukraine has the proof that it did exactly what it claims to have done. In its Telegram post announcing the destruction of the Russian soldiers in the Soyuz pipeline, the 7th Corps shared a video showcasing how Ukraine's forces combined ground-based and aerial assaults to destroy the Russian infiltrators. The 77th Airborne Brigade timely detected the enemy's intentions and, in cooperation with the adjacent units, stopped the enemy's assault. The liquidation of at least 40 enemy servicemen was confirmed, the 7th Corps announced in a post alongside its video. According to the results of the operation, the enemy did not achieve the set objectives, and the situation in the zone of responsibility was stabilized, the Corps added. Russia's infiltrators never stood a chance. How could they have? They were entombed within a pipeline that offered them no visibility and no opportunities to receive warnings that Ukraine knew precisely where they were. When the bombs started to drop, all that Russia's soldiers could do was panic and attempt to escape, crawling over the bodies of their comrades in the process. Very few made it out alive, and the Soyuz pipeline has become a mass grave for infiltrators who utterly failed to complete the objective set for them. Russia isn't giving up on its Kupyansk ambitions. Despite the collapse of its pipeline infiltration, Russia is still launching assaults in the direction of the city that it claims to hold. That's confirmed by the 7th Corps, which says, "The enemy continues to operate in small groups and tries to infiltrate between positions. The actions of the occupiers are under the constant control of the defense forces and are being stopped." This is in keeping with Putin's attempts to propagate his narrative of an inevitable Russian victory. The Kupyansk pipeline infiltration was just a small part of a much greater effort that Russia has been making over the past couple of months to showcase just how overwhelming its numerical advantage is in Ukraine. On December 13th, the Kyiv Independent reported on comments made by the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, who said that Russia had deployed additional reserves to the Donetsk region to maintain pressure on the cities of Pokrovsk and Mirnorad. Ukraine is responding to this intensification of assaults, as Syrsky explains. Specific steps have been identified to strengthen defenses, including ensuring the stable operation of key logistics routes, increasing the effectiveness of firepower, improving coordination between units, and providing troops with everything they need, Syrsky explained in December. This increase in forces in Donetsk matters because of what we mentioned earlier in the video about Kupyansk's proximity to the oblast that Putin wants to capture. This is all about speeding up the capture of territory to create the illusion of an inevitable Russian victory, just as the false claim of the fall of Kupyansk was. Russia has been capturing territory at a faster rate than at any other point during the previous year of 2024. As the New Voice of Ukraine reported on January 1st, data from the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, indicates that Russia managed to capture 0.8% of Ukraine in 2025. It did so by achieving a rate of advance of 13.2 square kilometers, or about 5.1 square miles per day. That's up from the rate of advance seen in 2024, which the ISW says was 9.87 square kilometers or 3.8 square miles per day. Putin's problem is simple. Having a lot of soldiers doesn't mean that Russia knows how to use those soldiers. The New Voice of Ukraine says that the increased gains seen in 2025 were paid for in the blood, of 416,570 soldiers, meaning that Russia lost around 78 troops for every square kilometer that it managed to capture during the year. As Putin intensifies assaults in the Kupyansk, Pokrovsk, and Mirnorad directions in 2026, Russia is likely to experience even heavier losses, especially when Ukraine sees its forces coming. 40 of Putin's soldiers are now dead in a pipeline from which they had no possible escape once Ukraine realized what those soldiers were trying to do. Those 40 soldiers add to the pile of bodies that Putin's brutal invasion has created. The obvious question that has to be asked now is why would Russia force its troops to trudge through miles of cramped gas pipelines? Yes, these pipelines offer a potentially secretive route towards strategically important locations, but they also nearly guarantee death for any soldiers who are caught within them. Surely it would be better for Russia to make advances above ground, if for no other reason than the country's soldiers would at least be able to see if Ukraine launched a counterattack against them. The answer to the question of why is simple. Russia's pipeline infiltrations have worked before, sometimes. Russia has adopted the method, using decommissioned gas pipelines to bypass Ukrainian defenses and threats posed by modern warfare. The goal is to avoid being detected by drones, artillery, and other strike systems, the Kyiv Independent writes in its report on Russia's Kupyansk pipeline failure. And there are instances when forcing soldiers into such cramped conditions has worked out well for Russia. For instance, when Russia was fighting to retake the portions of the Kursk region that Ukraine claimed in its August 2024 counter-invasion, pipelines ended up being extremely useful assets. In March 2025, the War Zone, or TWZ, reported on one mission in which Russia seemed to have managed to send around 100 of its soldiers through a pipeline in the direction of the town of Sudza. Those soldiers appeared to have made it through the pipe, allowing them to contribute to the assault on the town that Ukraine had captured, and Russia had a new trick up its sleeve. However, the location of this infiltration is important. Kursk is Russian territory, meaning that Putin's forces would likely have known exactly how long the pipe they traversed was and where they needed to exit. That sort of certainty goes a long way toward relieving the feelings of dread that naturally occur when trying to make your way through a pitch-black pipe. But Russia has since shifted this strategy into Ukraine. Questions have to be asked about how much Putin's forces actually know about the pipes they're now being forced into. It's possible that they only know the vague direction in which discovered pipelines will take them. Plus, Ukraine knows better than Russia where its pipelines are. Any attempt to use those pipes for infiltration purposes becomes much riskier as a result, especially when those pipes are located near territory that Russia is actively assaulting above ground. Ukraine knows the pipelines running through that territory present risks. It will monitor the pipes accordingly. What worked in Kursk hasn't been quite as successful in Ukraine on several of the many occasions that Russia has attempted its pipeline trick. The brutal destruction of around 40 Russian soldiers in a pipe near Kupyansk is just one example. There are others. Reports vary on the actual success of Russia's Kursk pipeline assault, for instance. Though TWZ suggests that Russia may have achieved some success with this March 2025 infiltration attempt, the New Voice of Ukraine tells a much different story. In its own March article, the outlet reported on comments made by Ukraine's general staff, which suggest that Ukraine knew about the infiltrators and allowed them to progress before destroying them. Currently, Russian special forces are being identified, blocked, and destroyed. The enemy's losses in Sudza are very significant, the general staff said at the time. So even what seemed to be an early pipeline success ended up shrouded in confusion. Russia did eventually manage to retake its lost territory in Kursk, regardless of how well the March pipeline excursion actually went. Later in the year, its forces tried a similar trick again, strangely enough also in the Kupyansk direction. We know for certain that this attempt failed, as reported by United 24 Media on September 17th. Ukraine managed to identify a pipeline that Russia was using to shift troops and equipment, and it doled out a horrible punishment. Ukraine's defenders sealed valves and destroyed sections of the pipe that Russia's forces were using, leading to flooding that claimed the lives of those stuck within the pipe. At best, Russia's pipeline strategy seems to offer a mixed bag of results. Though infiltration is possible using this strategy, every soldier who enters a Ukrainian pipe shoulders an enormous amount of risk. In January, Ukraine's defenders located the pipe they needed to target before Russia was able to use it for anything. In other cases, Russia has managed to utilize Ukraine's pipelines for a while, only for those pipes to be found and destroyed, leading to the deaths of anybody unfortunate enough to be inside. Don't underestimate just how horrifying this pipeline strategy can be for Russia's soldiers, even when they're not dealing with bombs, water, and Ukraine's many other potential responses. Back in July 2025, the Astra Telegram channel shared a video featuring what appeared to be a Russian soldier who had taken part in something that the soldier called Operation Pipe. The soldier detailed how poorly Russia organized its pipeline infiltrations in Kursk. People there were going crazy. One shot himself. One pointed a machine gun at himself. The second smashed his head in. The third crashed into a wall. Panic ensued, the soldier stated. Russia's forces dealt with issues including severely cramped conditions, a lack of oxygen, and problems with the supply of water and food that left them fearing for their lives, even with no Ukrainian involvement. Dozens of soldiers suffocated, committed suicide, or died in panic and delirium while trying to escape the pipe. At one point, the soldier simply couldn't go any further, and his fellow soldiers abandoned him halfway, from where he crawled and barely managed to escape, Astra says of the video that it shared. It seems that Putin isn't satisfied with subjecting his forces to the horrors of the war that he started above ground. An unfortunate few are sent on missions below the ground on which their comrades die in droves. There they face death and terror unlike anything seen on the battlefield. But Putin doesn't care. In December, United 24 media reported on what happened during another attempt by Russia's forces to use a pipeline in Kupyansk. The outlet says that those soldiers were dying in the pipeline even as Putin was receiving the false word that his soldiers had captured the city. That sheds new light on the Russian president's debunked claim about Kupyansk's fall. Putin may have genuinely believed his commanders on the ground when they told him that they'd taken the city. All the while, Kupyansk still stood, and Russia's forces were dying underground. About 40 more of those soldiers have died due to another failed pipeline infiltration. Kupyansk still stands, and Putin won't care about the blood that has been shed in the pipelines if his forces are eventually able to change the situation in the city. That may be easier said than done, as Ukraine is going to be much stronger in 2026 than Putin realizes. An influx of new weapons, some from Ukraine's Western partners and others built in Ukraine itself, looks set to arrive on the battlefield this year. Find out what those weapons are and why they might spell doom for Putin in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the situation in Kupyansk. And thank you for watching.